And I've worked with dogs and cats and horses and cattle and sheep and goats. And I started one of the first elk herds in Ontario. I was the health knowledge behind it, but nobody had any knowledge of that at the time. I started off talking a little bit like that because my experience with Auum is tied to what I did before. In the last couple of years in practice, I had about 8 boxer dogs become paralyzed. And they were from a few different kennels, so they weren't genetically related. And usually when an animal starts to show signs of proprioceptive loss, paralysis in the hind end, and you can identify that it's a spinal cord issue, then you say, okay, we've got a prolapsed disc, or we've got a tumor, or we've got something affecting the spinal cord. These dogs didn't show to be positive that way. And some researchers down at Kansas State finally came up with the idea that this was an autoimmune disease, and it was a new disease. There had been a mutation in the boxer breed, and that these 8 boxers in 2 years had fallen prey to this. And they call it degenerative myelopathy. Normal treatment for cord compression is steroids, and they work usually pretty well, and none of it worked on these dogs. So I started to think a little bit outside the box as to what I could do for them. And one of the things I was thinking about was Lorenzo's oil. One of the 8 dogs that had degenerative myelopathy was my own boxer. And he was about 7, and he was starting to drag his hind feet. You could do a genetic test, a cheek swab, or send blood down to Kansas State, and they would give you a specific diagnosis that it was degenerative myelopathy, and it was an autoimmune disease, very much akin to MS in people. There was a protein being produced in the bone marrow, which got out into the bloodstream, went in through the blood-brain barrier and started to demyelinate the spinal cord. So I figured perhaps this Lorenzo's oil would help prevent the demyelination or to help remyelinate the spinal cord. I found the Lorenzo's oil, I started off with small amounts, actually improved my dog. And about this time, but it was up and down. He would get better, and then he'd get a little bit worse. Then he'd get better when I changed the dose, and then he'd get a little worse. I think I bought him another 9-10 months of not being, he went into a doggy wheelchair eventually. Before all that though, my good friend Patty Levesque said, Jan, you gotta come around to this meeting and listen to this guy, RJ Miller, and learn about this Auum. So, I was pronouncing Auum at the time. I went to Rose's house and listened to RJ. And I took some of the pet Auum and I added it to the Lorenzo's oil. And that day, Spuddy or Patrick ran around the house. I had 4 of them, so I picked up their names like other children. Patrick ran around the house. And so that's what opened my eyes. I thought, holy smokes, all we did was just, he was getting an ounce twice a day of Lorenzo's oil. I added 5 cc's of Auum, and we had a phenomenally different response. I think the final product that we were using was based on Auum. We were cutting the uric acid with the Auum. We had 2 or 3 other amino acids in it, coenzyme 10 and B vitamins. And we had actually reversed the and this was a dog that was clinically degenerative myelopathy, had a demyelinating disease, and had clinical signs. We reversed those signs. These responses that I was seeing in animals was really turning my crank and getting me excited about things. about omega-3s. I had been told 15, 20 years before, when omega-3s were introduced in veterinary medicine, of what they did and how they worked. And I'm looking at them and thinking, jeepers, they really don't work that well. Until I started to utilize the Auum product, and I was seeing more of a positive response in animals that were getting the mammalian omega-3 as opposed to the fish oil plant oils that we've been given in the past. One of my neighbors, one of my really good friend neighbors, his daughter had MS. And it hit her suddenly. She's at home and her career was shortchanged, and she's sitting at home. And I took a bottle of the Auum around to her, the human one. And I said, Jackie, I said, I think you should try this. And, you know, it may be better for you. And she took it, and that day she called me back. She said, Jan, I feel so much better. And she started taking it. And because she's been doing so well, her whole family's taking it now. So Jim and Nancy and their daughter Jackie are all taking it, and they stand by it. And it's made a big improvement in her life. I have a 30-year-old cousin who's been autistic all his life. He's never spoken. He speaks, can communicate a little bit via computer, but mostly he doesn't speak. I managed, he's in the system now, being on DACA, because he's 30, 32 or so. And the people looking after him are doing a really good job. I managed to get them to go, okay, we'll put him on some of this Auum. And I provided that for him. And it was sort of stretching their parameters of care to actually put that into the system for him. But before he had one bottle down, he said 2 words the first time in his life. He was at a job site and somebody drove in and hit the ladder he was on, and he fell 35 feet and hit his head on a bumper on the way down. So he was in a coma for 8 weeks. They had taken the whole top off his skull to let his brains finish swelling. And 2 years after he'd come out of the coma, I was visiting again, and I knew, I had seen on Cindy's kitchen counter, she took salmon oil, and she took omega-3s, and she took 3 or 4 different things that her doctor had said, oh, it might be useful because you've had breast cancer. And I said, Cindy, here, take this home, and why don't you it'll take care of all that other stuff. But it might be better, you may feel a little bit better, and it has a bit more D in it. I said, let's try a bottle on Charlie, too. Because she was spending her life looking after Charlie. 2 weeks later, I got the most moving phone call from Sandy. She said, Jan, when you dropped by to visit and it left that oil, she said, all I figured that was left of my life was fighting off this cancer and looking after this slob who used to be my beautiful husband. She said, you gave me my husband back. We upped Charlie's personality to the point where he's now livable. I think that happened a year ago, maybe in September or August. I started them on the oil, and Charlie's doing awesomely well, and Cindy's doing really well. She was telling me about 3 months ago, for the first time in her life, her cholesterol levels are absolutely normal, and all she takes now is the oil. But to see a response in Charlie, his neurologist had said, after 2 years, you go downhill after a brain injury. You don't go up. He's gone up. We've knocked the socks off his doctors, and he's still continuing to do that now, and he's continuing to improve. There's a little girl that lives next door to her who's ADD, and if she doesn't get her home, everybody knows. And she was so afraid that she wasn't going to be able to get through school and get into university. And within 3, she's my little barometer, and I can test doses on her. because within 3 hours of taking home, she's focused. Otherwise, she's scatterbrained all over the place. And she's about 13. I expect her to stabilize out.